Hey guys, and welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while since my last episode, and I've changed a lot since the last episode. So making a continuation episode without taking those changes into consideration just did not sit right with me. I really want to be a little bit more than just a textbook for what immersive and maladaptive daydreaming is. I want to be able to talk and connect with you guys about my own experiences as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. That goes without saying, I love teaching you guys about the topic and all the new information I learn about this. And I'm really excited to keep learning and talking to you guys about it in the future. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. So for the first part of this, I'm going to be talking about how I daydream and also how marijuana has impacted my daydreaming, because last year I've been smoking and I actually quit, and you guys are going to learn about that in a bit on why. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I remembered posting something about it on my Instagram, and I made a lot of you curious, and a lot of people were like, I want to do this now. And I'm like, well, I mean, what you're doing is you're taking a mind-altering substance and then you're using your brain to form daydreams. I mean, what could go wrong? So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And then for the second half of the podcast, I'm going to be doing a little reiteration, if that's the right word. It might not be. I'm a little small brain, excuse me. Let's just pretend like I didn't murder a bunch of brain cells last year. So I've talked about my parents and I've gone a little bit into their stories before, but I don't think I've ever really talked about how I daydream or some of the basic things that I've been asked a lot over Instagram. I'm super visual and I need some sort of external stimulus to keep me going throughout the session, like tapping, pacing, rocking. I almost always use music. I have a second phone that I use specifically for my music. And I have at least 1,000 songs on it, but I stopped counting by now. I have a rectangular black carpet in the middle of my room that I walk in circles on, and I usually keep like one strip of my LED lights on its lowest setting with the saturation all the way up, just so, bump up that immersion a little bit, make the room look cool so I feel comfy. I always wear my fuzzy pants, and I tuck my phone into my pocket. Sometimes if it's too bright, the light, I'll just keep my phone brightness on and then cover it up with a blanket so it's like the perfect night light. Just a little bit of light to get in there, because I cannot do it in complete darkness. No, thank you. I have a dozen or so playlists for specific moods that definitely need to be organized better. But growing up, the main times I would daydream would usually be on my bus ride or my walk to school, in the bathroom where nobody could find me, or under my blanket. Unfortunately, I've been caught mid-pace a lot of times and it does not feel good at all. The pressure of hiding my daydreams made my point to withdrawal a lot harder, but I was always moving from group home to group home growing up, so no one was ever really that consistent in my life, so people who caught me daydreaming would be like out of my life by the time I moved to my next home, so it didn't really matter. It didn't destroy me, daydreaming, but it was one of my most creative outlets. I probably looked like a weirdo, but I was connecting in a way, and it gave me purpose. With this in mind, I skipped almost every single day of school because I couldn't handle being in the classrooms with all the other kids. So at a point, I just started bringing a pillow and a blanket to school. Don't follow my footsteps. I ended up repeating the 10th grade and then just dropping out and getting my GED. So as you can imagine, I have more than enough things to say about how my daydreaming world developed and how intensive it is. What changed the most since we last talked was my last move. I turned 18 in June of 2019 and was no longer a foster kid. They said, "You an adult now, bitch, get the fuck out." So I moved in with my family, where I got my GED, but this isn't the move I'm talking about. I stayed with this family for about a year, and then I moved again into my own apartment. Here was when my daydreaming really changed. Between my complete self-isolation, deep need to dream, and already pegging mental fragility, I added another factor: marijuana. I don't smoke now, so it shouldn't be an issue talking about it now, but there was a point where it completely rewrote the history of who I was and who I saw myself in my paracosm. I obviously don't recommend what I did because I think everyone should be careful and mindful about what they do and put in their bodies and understand how they react. But I clearly didn't, and it took me until I started noticing the physical repercussions of smoking every day to get me to slow down on my intake. I started smoking again. The first time I started smoking was when I was like 15, if you're curious. But I started smoking again because I felt like I visualized better. The more I used, the less controlled I was, though, in the process of progressing my story. I have a really sensitive mind, so it's harder for me than most people, I think, to be able to control the direction of thoughts, especially while under the influence. This doesn't mean I'm in a life-threatening danger, but I did end up having to do all sorts of mental gymnastics to be able to stay on track with my conversations. I just couldn't keep up as well, which in turn made me way more frustrated. It got harder to remember my own scenarios, and it scared me because it felt like my life was being ripped away. This is a life that I can't physically walk in, but a life that I chose to be in for years. I dealt with the pain until the headaches started rolling in. I made emotional attachments. It was how I felt, love of family without having one. You can imagine the thought of forgetting basically my own lore, if you want to put it that way. It's when I say lore, I think of like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, and my daydreams are just about a family. That's so sad. But you can imagine like the thought of forgetting these people and the places that I drew myself in. It's fucking terrifying. The upside was that we were together, and by together I mean like it was easier to feel like it was real. And I never really saw myself as a person in my paracosm. Like when I would daydream about Aiden and Dalen and their families, like I never imagined me walking in there. We're not the type of people to brush shoulders, but for some reason it felt like he was right there. I mean, even thinking about it now makes me do a double take in order to explain everything, but I always saw myself in Aiden's perspective, unless I was looking directly at him. This was mostly an unspoken thing in my head, but when I was there, I was just there, total control. When I was smoking, I lost that control, and I was able to focus less on the coherence of the plot and more of a regular talk. I never really came up with a way to introduce myself to my paras. I was just one day way too stoned and crying and needing a hug, and then I just randomly thought of Aiden hugging me, but it felt so much more real, and I think that kind of like pushed my need to smoke more, because it was like, you ain't getting a hug like that in 2020. The first thing I could do was the first thing I could think to do was hug back or thank him, and from then on I started smoking to connect to them in that different kind of perspective until, it started hurting me. So I would still imagine my music video like scenarios, but I blocked out a lot of memories, and Aiden and Dalen were still talking to me, but suddenly a lot of things that were sensitive got a whole lot more sensitive. I was getting triggered a lot more easily. Obviously I couldn't get through a conversation with Dalen without, I'm stuttering over my words. I couldn't ever get through a conversation with Dalen without learning something. And even though I kept breaking my physical self by doing this, there was a lot to gain, and my mental stability broke. And I knew I had to quit because it was getting a little bit too much for me. That was a little all over the place. I guess what I mean to say is like, when I grew up, before I was smoking, I would daydream about me and Dalen talking, and it would be a very long conversation, big words, like very literate. And then when you smoke, I guess one of the things that affect me personally more is loss of memory, or short-term memory loss. And it was harder to keep up a conversation that could have something meaningful in it. Usually Aiden would go to Dalen and they'd have a really serious conversation and talk for hours. And then by the end of it, because I was kind of imagining myself and a more mature mindset, because Dalen was always an adult, and I've been daydreaming about this adult talking to me since I was a kid, but I pretended I was an adult too, because and when I started smoking more, I couldn't think right. I couldn't think my way through a whole conversation, which is like, what do you expect? But they fucking did it, and I did it again, and I lost my brain cells, okay? And now we're changing topics. So now I'm going to be talking about my daydreams, and I'm going to give you a brief history on my paracosm, and I have a feeling that this is going to be my best description yet. So for the purpose of this description, I'm not going to be over clarifying. I noticed that when I talk to people in real life about my description and I explain scenarios, obviously I'm going to discuss it like I was there, but in explaining, I get cut off mid-sentence with a comment like, but you know he's not real, right? Like I didn't express a disclaimer in the first place. Comments like this make it a bit harder to continue talking about it, like as if you were ranting about like Harry Potter or your favorite book, and then in mid-sentence or mid-rant somebody reminds you like, but you know it's just a book. You're getting really pent up. Like, I get it, I know. Let me have my emotional attachments and leave me the fuck alone. I feel like it's a little bit different though, because I created these scenarios and I've been in them for years. I started daydreaming about Aiden at like 13 or 12, and I'm 19 now. I did this so I could feel something or learn something new, like a different way to handle a specific trauma, which I talked about earlier, which has been so very beneficial for me. So you can imagine the emotional attachments I have for these quote characters. It may sound like I'm putting too much effort into talking about them, like they're people, but they are people to me, even though, and it doesn't really take much effort until you pull the immersion rug from under my feet. If you've seen any of my other videos on my paras, this is going to be a longer, maybe not longer, but a little bit more in-depth look. This is pre-written too, so I don't get off topic. So I'm going to start off by giving you a list of people, or the closest people in my life in my paracosm. You have Aiden Kelly, who is usually me. You have Dalen Lynn, he's best friend / boyfriend. You have Marissa, Aiden's mom, Phineas, Aiden's dad, Mason, Aiden's brother, Nicholas, Aiden's older brother, X, one of Aiden's best friends, Carter and Owen, which are Dalen's dads. I have a long list, but these are the names that you're probably going to hear come up the most. Aiden grew up in a suburban neighborhood with his parents and his two brothers in Northern California, around Portland. When he was in 6th grade, the Lynns moved into the neighborhood from London. Ironically enough, Marissa and Phineas used to work with Carter and Owen before Aiden was born, so it was nice for them to have friends back in the neighborhood that they knew. Dalen was a grade older than Aiden, so they never got any classes together, but they started hanging out a lot after school. Aiden would walk over to Dalen's house and they'd play video games, or Aiden would just watch Dalen play because it was just fun. Aiden was in middle school when he ended up getting taken to the other side of the country, closer to being in Canada. With no way to contact his family and no idea where he was, it felt hopeless. His family tried so hard to find him, but no one knew where he went. He was kidnapped. At this point in time, Aiden was in his mid-teens with no access to a phone or idea what to do. Mind you, I created this scenario when I was young, and I now realize the trauma that this is attached to, and I kind of feel like I had to turn into an adult to understand how this connected to my own personal trauma. And now after making those connections, it's really hard to talk about it now. Also, it's harder to talk about it in general because Aiden's been so real for me this past 2020. He was literally the best part about 2020, because fuck reality, that year sucked. So this was back to the story. This was when a guy named X found him and told him that he'd help him get home. Being that he wasn't scared by the people who were hurting him, he took Aiden and helped him run away and fed him and promised not to hurt him. Aiden wasn't able to call his family and tell them the news for multiple reasons. One being that the police would have put him in intensive care. X really wasn't somebody who was on good terms with the police, and without proof of ID, Aiden definitely would have been taken into custody, being that he was still a teenager. So him and X road tripped it, and it ended up taking way longer than expected. They ended up living together for like 9 months, staying in different places on the way. X did and sold drugs, nothing too crazy like heroin or crack, but like mostly just weed or ecstasy or psychedelics. Honestly, he stopped doing a lot of it after he met Aiden, and he kept his word, and Aiden was quick to help him whenever he wasn't feeling well, or if X was too high or something. Aiden was always there, and he got him to chill out on all the crazy drugs he was doing. So I'm pretty sure like all he does now is like smoke weed. I bet he can handle it. I can't handle that shit. Weed makes me freak out now. But when Aiden returned to his family, they were really relieved. I mean, of course, you had a missing son for like a year. So while he dropped him off, X stayed in his car on the other side of the street until he saw Aiden go safely inside. It always makes me cry thinking about it, because him and X hugged, and then he got out of the car and walked to his door, and his mom opened the door, and she was just full fucking tears, grabbing him and hugging him and bringing him inside, and X just waited for him to get inside safely and then left. And it was the last time they talked for a really long time. So I always cry thinking about it. I don't want to cry. Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. But let me move on. Okay. When Aiden did come in, obviously I had to tell them what happened, where he had been. He told them most of the story, but he had to fabricate it a little bit to keep X out of it, because how are you going to explain to your sweet suburban mother, your sweet suburban mother, how are you going to explain how you trusted a random stranger to take you across the country on nothing but a whim that he wouldn't hurt you? Also, Aiden joined his gang, so he was definitely not telling his sweet suburban mother about it. She did not find out until eventually, like years later, when she watched a documentary on Purity, which is the name of the gang that he joined, and his little brother Mason pointed out that Aiden had the same tattoo on his ankle that they had in the documentary. And that was a whole fight that I'm not going to get into right now, because it will give me a headache. When Aiden came back, him and Dalen started hanging out again. They had feelings for each other, but Dalen had already started dating a girl named Jacqueline, and Aiden started dating a guy named Lance, who turned out to be a complete fucking asshole. Dalen was always the first to find out any drama that was going on in Aiden's life. So, I mean, to be fair, he was the only one who knew about X that Aiden trusted to tell about him, because, again, X not friendly with police, and his parents definitely would have tried to tell the police something about him or get Aiden to say something, and Aiden's a loyal ass nigga, likes. But when Lance started being abusive, and he basically... excuse me. I'm sorry, my throat kind of hurts. I don't have corona. I've just been yelling a lot. So when Lance started being abusive and basically making him stay with him all the time, Dalen picked up on these red flags. And the only reason the only reason Aiden didn't want to leave him was because Lance was threatening to kill himself if he left. Dalen came up with a plan to break up with him at a park, and he would be watching from the sidelines in case anything went south. It ended up with Lance screaming and trying to grab Aiden and get him into the car, so Dalen came out and beat the fuck out of him. And that was the end of it, and Lance never did anything. Aiden started feeling a lot safer at Dalen's house because there was a time Lance did try to come to his house to talk to him, so Aiden just started sleeping over at Dalen's, and they started sleeping together. He started sleeping over, not together. In his room every night, and their feelings for each other progressed a lot more over time. Daylan ended up breaking up with Jacqueline, and him and Aiden would sleep in the same room together, share the bed or whatever. And Aiden he would have like so many nightmares at a point that Daylan came up with a regimen for getting him out of these panic-induced states when Aiden would wake up in cold sweats. They didn't tell their parents about their relationship for years. They weren't scared, per se, about telling their parents that they developed a relationship for each other. It's not like they're homophobic. I mean, Daylan has 2 dads. I mean, what the fuck are they gonna say? They're really good parents. Not that I had any. I'm kidding. I scream after I make a self-deprecating joke. Fucking God help me. Yeah, so they weren't scared per se, but they felt like telling them would be weird because their parents had known each other for so long. They were so used to seeing Daylan and Aiden as friends. They just kind of didn't want to tell them. It took them like 3 years to tell their parents, and that was a very long talk. I think they talked. How long was that talk? They sat down. I'm thinking now. They sat down with their parents in the living room and told them, and it was like 3 hours. A 3-hour talk about all the shit that they had to hide from them. Not that they didn't have any hints though. By the time they told them, a couple people in the family kind of already had a clue. But it was a really long talk. It was a really long talk with lots of laughs and a little more than a couple sarcastic notes. There was a lot of episodes here that I'm leaving out, as well as all the older. There's a lot of episodes here that I'm leaving out, as well as all the other alternate dimensions of them that went through slightly altered to completely different life timelines. So I hope you guys understand that this is kind of, it's more in depth, but still very brief in the span of it. So I hope you guys understand. Maybe this is something I can do weekly. I mean, I live basically alone in my own apartment now, and it's kind of lonely and sucks. So I do want to make more videos now. Yeah, so maybe this is something I can do weekly because I just have so many stories and they're always developing. I feel like as a teenager, all of my daydreams were like an action movie, but now all I want to do is just cuddle and be a normal person. And yeah, but I guess your dreams naturally change when your needs do, and I feel like I've really patched up a lot of the empty holes in my own heart and life. So I'm just embracing my ever-changing daydreaming style, you know? So other things that's changed for me is recognizing my trauma. I talked about it a little bit earlier that I didn't pick up on when I was younger. And I realized some of those things, it made me change the way I looked at my own scenes as Aiden. And now it's harder to talk about these parts of my paracosm without spazzing out, which says a lot since the younger me was the one who formed these memories into my brain. I honestly do feel like a need for respect is due there. I don't want these memories to die in vain because so much love was there with the pain. And I think it's important to keep that in check because even though my scenarios weren't always like butterflies and daisies, I mean, this is coming from the person who had to live in crack houses I was a children. I was a children in a crack house. That's me. I mean, no, but seriously, like lots of fighting, lots of watching adults shoot needles into their arms. I had a rough childhood, and then I just started moving from place to place with adults who said they cared about me, and then I move and they weren't even allowed to give me their Instagram handle or something. So losing relationships and stuff has always like been, I mean, yeah, I have attachment issues now. I don't want to get into my own trauma. This is too much now. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Yeah, I hope you got something from this. I hope that this story interested you in a way. I'm gonna, I don't know, go watch PewDiePie and go to sleep or something. Who am I kidding? It's like 2 p.m. I need to do something with my life. Bye, guys.